Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, May 20th, 2025, and today we'll talk about if there is anything that can be done about squirrels in the garden, how to use buckwheat as a cover crop without it becoming a mess, and can you transplant corn? Really? So let's do it. All right, so since today we're going to talk about transplanting corn, I thought I would at least show you what happens when you try and direct seed it. Because try as I may, and I do almost every season, the birds, specifically the crows, they will find it and they will kill it. All right, well, happy Tuesday, everyone. I hope your weeks are off to a good start. Yesterday, I didn't get a whole lot done, of at least not interesting things done, but I did get that jangly cover crop that I mentioned yesterday mowed down and ready for tarping. I did not move the tarp over there yet, though, because we are getting some thunderstorms and heavy rain today, like right now, and it just won't quit on my poor state. And I didn't want the area where the tarp is to be vulnerable to erosion, so that'll be for tomorrow, I guess. And today will be lots of harvesting in the rain, which is always fun. Whatever, though. I always say this about farming, but you will have to work some cruddy days, but you will never have to miss another nice day again. So that kind of rules. Okay, so today I thought I would talk a bit about transplanting corn, sweet pop, dent, flint, whatever your corn of choice. Can or should it be transplanted? Now, first, why would you bother doing that? Well, obviously, that video clip I started the show off with gives you one good reason to not just directly seed corn. Birds will find it and eat the sweet germ right out of it, systematically going up and down the row and picking each one out. Can't say they aren't efficient, though. The other reason is that transplanting in general is just a better use of space anyway. When you are using transplants, you are not wasting precious time and space in the garden waiting for the plant to germinate and then protecting it from birds and all the pests while it gets tall enough to protect itself. Also, if you're going to direct seed corn, just cover it with row cover until it's a few inches tall to protect it from crows. I just didn't get around to it on the clip that you saw, but usually if I'm direct seeding corn, that's the way to do it. So anyway, does transplanting corn work? Well, anecdotally, yes, corn can be transplanted. I've done it several times. I do that almost every year, in fact, for both sweet corn and popcorn. But more fun than it worked for that nerd Farmer Jesse is that almost no crop, maybe no crop at all, has been more well studied on than corn. So here is some of what I could find in the research as it pertains to transplanting corn. There was a 2010 case study out of the University of Vermont where one farmer, John Satz, was transplanting sweet corn successfully, which the document itself has a cool little homemade drop seeder that John made. It's very cool. And I'll link that document in the show notes so you can check it out. But anyway, John was double seeding, meaning 2 seeds per cell, each of the cells in a 128 cell tray. So that's slightly larger cell size to save labor in the greenhouse, then planting each of those cells a little further apart in the row. So like 16 inches with rows like 36 inches apart. He was growing them out to about 14 to 18 days before transplanting. You generally don't want them to get too old in these cells, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And he was getting consistent yields at about 800 to 1,000 dozen per acre organically, which is maybe slightly lower than conventional producers, but shows at very least that it does work. John also said variety makes a big difference. And again, this is in Vermont, so the soil won't quite be as warm as quickly as it will be in other areas like mine. Basically, he could grow a sweet corn crop in Vermont earlier and more uniformly because he was transplanting it. But of course, that's not the end of the research. According to one overview of the research on transplanted corn that I found, quote, transplanted corn produces about 15.44% higher grain yield and can be harvested 10 to 12 days earlier than that of direct seeded crops, end quote. There are other studies that show that transplanting can produce corn up to 3 weeks earlier than directly seeding it. What the research I can find seems to suggest, and this is my experience as well, transplanting the corn crop when it's relatively young is better, especially if using cell trays. You don't want the roots to wrap around and around. I don't use cell trays, but I also don't use soil blocks for this, so the roots don't, mingle too much within the blocks because they are somewhat sensitive on corn in comparison to other crops. But instead, I prefer wind strips that keep the cells pretty well separated and also provide that air pruning effect. Additionally, do not let the roots move around outside of the trays as they can move around on like table. Like if you set the tray on the table, the roots will often just kind of like go down the table looking for more moisture and nutrients. You want the air pruning effect, meaning that you want the roots to hit air and stop growing and start putting their energy into the plant instead of the roots.
If you do plan to trial this idea, and again, like all things in gardening, start small. Don't do your entire crop this way for the first time you're ever trying it. Just start small. Another factor is that some varieties just do better than others. So it may be worth, if you are going to try this, planting 2 different varieties just in case one doesn't love the whole transplanting thing. Also, growing them out, you need to consider rodents and possible birds inside of the greenhouse and also the space that they will take up. But anyway, yeah, mice will do the same thing to a tray of corn that a crow will do in the field, and your swear jar will swell. Now, this still will not likely make it profitable to grow corn, sweet or otherwise, but it may make it slightly more worth it in terms of the amount of time and the space that is taken up. Saving 2 or 3 weeks on a bed makes a huge difference, right? If it's not just 2 or 3 weeks of it being very small or germinating, that's helpful. Of course, factoring in the labor in the greenhouse and the space in the greenhouse and the labor in transplanting it, that all has to be done if you're growing this for like market or a CSA, and charge at very least $1 an ear for sweet corn if you're selling it. I mean, genuinely, like that's probably bare minimum. Anyway, all that to say, it is possible to transplant corn if you do it thoughtfully, but whether you should or do it is entirely up to your goals, time, material, equipment, space, all that stuff. And like always, if you have a system that works, there's no necessary need to change it, but you can trial it and see how it compares. Again, if you want to try transplanting, just do a small trial to start. All right, was that interesting? Helpful? Let me know any thoughts or experiences you have with transplanted sweet corn, popcorn, dent corn, or otherwise. Up next, we'll take a quick break, and when we return, we will squirrel BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Ring of Fire. What if you could turn your brush problem into black gold? The Ring of Fire Biochar Kiln is your spring tool for soil transformation, converting woody debris into high-quality biochar in just hours. Biochar will kickstart your compost, retain water and nutrients in your soil, and provide habitat for beneficial microbes. Now $19.95 with flat rate shipping. Their spring sale runs through June. Don't wait to boost your soil and optimize your inputs. Visit ringoffire.earth/growers now to learn more. Also, for more information on biochar, check out the No Till Market Garden podcast interview with Kelpie Wilson, inventor of the Ring of Fire kiln, that we will link in the show notes. Today's episode is also brought to you by FarmRaise. Still struggling with your balance sheet? Your lender's asking for a balance sheet and you're stuck with a spreadsheet mess or guessing your numbers? FarmRaise Tracks takes the stress out of farm finance. With one click, you can generate an accurate, up-to-date balance sheet that shows your assets, liabilities, and equity. No accounting degree required. You'll be ready for loan applications, tax season, or just a clearer picture of where your farm stands. Join thousands of farmers using Tracks to build stronger businesses. Get 20% off with code NOTIL20 at farmraise.com for the lifetime of your membership. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Dan Gorman, who writes, quote, "Hey Jesse, hope your dehydration stays away for a while and things are drying out for you on the farm." Hopefully both of those things, but they aren't at the moment. Anyway, Dan writes, "Sorry if you've addressed this already, but I'm curious about squirrel management. They are more than happy to interplant walnuts in my garden, then go digging for said walnuts. It has hit my garlic bed pretty hard. Is exclusion the best option? I'd love to have more open space between my beds and their squirrel highways, trees, fences, etc. But my eventual goal is to have a farm in town, so the setting would be similar to my backyard garden, only scaled up. Thank you in advance and always appreciate the well-researched and thoughtful responses." End quote. Okay, so great question. And I believe I did talk about squirrels at least briefly for an earlier episode, but I didn't do a ton on them. So game on. Also, like I always say, it's worth revisiting every question just for new insight, new angles, new takes, maybe even new information or tools. So in effect, don't hesitate to ask whatever is on your mind. This is an ever-evolving field, no pun intended, but with research and all those things. So we're always learning something new. Always something to share. So again, don't hesitate. So I'm not sure where you're located, but presumably somewhere urban, which is kind of squirrels' jam. Not only were squirrels purposely introduced to cities, and for their part, starting back in the late 1800s to bring more nature into the urban landscape, cities and towns, it turns out, are just really primed for squirrels with the number of trees and power lines that connect all the houses, along with all the fodder from oaks to walnuts to bird feeders and so on. They have very few natural predators in towns and cities as well. Towns and cities are warmer, and even better for the squirrels, urban dwellers like to keep small gardens. which squirrels love. I've mentioned this before, but we've never really had huge squirrel issues here, at least like where we're located, just because we don't have huge populations of squirrels around. I mean, they're here, but they're not causing much damage. Everything is too kind of spread out, and the squirrel is less likely to run all the way to another tree across the field than they are to just hop from tree to tree in a neighborhood. Anyway, that is not super helpful to you, but yes, they certainly can be a problem in the city. And unfortunately, beyond exclusion, there are not a ton of options because they can climb over basically anything. They can jump exceedingly far. Squirrels are just crafty little dudes. So here's what I might say. A dog could help discourage them, though a dog could also bring new challenges for a garden, which is perhaps going to be the only natural predator you can legally and safely introduce yourself. Additionally, or alternatively, perhaps, if you have the space or option to do so, providing habitat for their other predators like owls and hawks is something you could look into. Maybe some motion activated sprinklers could be an option, though it's not clear to me how effective those are for how long. I really recommend watching Mark Rober's Squirrel Proof Bird Feeder episodes that Mark did just to get a feel for how clever these creatures are. Whatever you do, they will adapt, so don't invest too much in one control method. Instead, invest in a diverse squirrel management strategy. Or again, just cover those beds. So use exclusion. At least for the most part, they should leave the beds alone. If it's too much trouble for them, they'll find somebody else's beds. Planting mint around, I've seen, could also potentially assist in deterring them. Just if you do go, those sorts of routes, just make sure it does not go to seed anywhere near your gardens, or just keep pots or whatever nowhere near them because, mint creeps. And via not only seeds, thousands of them, but also rhizomes. Unrelated to this exact issue of digging up the beds, I did read somewhere that if squirrels are just partially eating crops like tomatoes, they are really just thirsty, and you could deter them with a bird bath to drink out of. No idea if that works. It's one of those things that makes sense, but may not make science. So yeah, let me know if you have experience with that. So could be helpful in the future for someone. Things like rubber snakes and fake owls, well, that's also something that people sometimes recommend, but that type of stuff will only work for a short time, and then the squirrels will figure it out because they're not dummies. You could try sprinkling hot pepper powder like sand seeds, so something maybe less like red pepper flakes and more like cayenne pepper around where they're digging just to kind of deter them. But again, a more dynamic multi-pronged solution is really the only way, so multiple things, or a biodome. Anyway, I hope something in there was helpful. Otherwise, one last break, and when we come back, buckwheat. Be right back. Today's episode is also brought to you by Precip. Precip is billed as the easiest way to keep track of rainfall, and that is true, but it is a lot more than that. Sure, you can open the app and immediately see accurate rainfall totals, but you can also save locations to see historical rainfall totals, wind speeds, and all sorts of other nerdy details. Their radar-based technology means you can ditch the rain gauge. I usually have to do that anyway because the kids find a way to smash it with a baseball bat. You can ditch the rain gauge and start tracking rain and other growing conditions all on your phone. Click the link in the show notes to find out more. Today's episode is also brought to you by Farmhand. I started a CSA to grow food and build community, not to drown in admin work. Spreadsheets, emails, and pack lists take up too much time. If I could spend less time at my desk and more in the field, that'd be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand automates billing, newsletters, websites, and member support, saving CSA farmers 20 plus hours a week. Focus on farming, not paperwork. See how Farmhand can help. Book a one-on-one demo with founder Ari at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. All right, so buckwheat is a fun little cover crop, but only if it's done right. Let's talk for a minute about how to use this famous cover crop and how not to use it. First, some things to think about or to know about buckwheat is that it is very fast. This is a crop that will flower in about 25 to 30 days if it's planted at the right time. And those flowers can be great for beneficials, though beekeepers notably loathe buckwheat for the flavor it imparts on honey, which some describe as smoky molasses, which incidentally is a free novelistic name for the taking if you want it. The buckwheat flowers do also turn into seeds after about 2 to 3 weeks, so it's important that the crop is terminated well before that point. unless you're hoping for buckwheat as a grain, which, to be fair, is used for making soba noodles or can make a nice rich addition to pancakes and cookies. So that is a thing. Buckwheat roots are also really good for gathering phosphorus for the soil and other nutrients. Plus, although the roots are fairly shallow, those roots can help lock soil in place after a tillage event to keep it from blowing or washing away. Now, how does one make the most of these characteristics? Well, first, buckwheat is an excellent placeholder. If you don't need a bed for a couple or a few weeks, buckwheat has your back. It will cover that bed and even enrich it while you wait to replant it. Sometimes this may happen if, say, you have a crop failure and the next crop you plan for that spot is still not ready to go in, or maybe you have a crop that just does really well and comes out early, or you forget to seed something on time, or whatever the case may be. Buckwheat can fill that spot while you wait. It does not have to get all the way up to the flowering stage for it to be helpful either. That's not a requisite. There have been times where I have had buckwheat in just for like 2 or 3 weeks and then mowed the green leafy mass and planted the next crop. Also, because it grows so fast that it can help suppress weeds, which can be useful in situations where maybe the bed got a little weedy last year. It's also said to have a mild allelopathic effect, which means it puts out a weed suppressant chemical out of its roots. And then though that might be true, the shade is probably doing a lot of the work to suppress the weeds by outpacing and thus weakening them. Anyway, back to mowing the buckwheat for a second. In a no-till situation, this is also a great characteristic of buckwheat. It's relatively easy to terminate with just a low to the ground mowing. I like the sort of chop and drop versus any sort of crimping, though you could theoretically crimp it, because it is fast and buckwheat is incredibly tender. So it's not going to leave behind like a difficult, or for that matter, a helpful layer of plant material to contend with like grasses do. It is, of course, notably a summer-only cover crop. Buckwheat is frankly a wuss when it comes to cold soil or cold weather and will not germinate in low soil temperatures nor grow very fast in cool air temperatures. One thing I see a lot is people, including seed companies, adding buckwheat to their summer cover crop mixes. No, don't do that. Or at least don't add it directly to the mix. We just talked about how buckwheat is a great weed suppressant crop. So if you sow it with other cover crops, it will suppress those too. The only exception are things like radishes and arugula, if you do not plan to plant a brassica in that same place, for the next crop or two. Plus mung beans, which albeit not a traditional cover crop, are a relatively fast legume. What I would recommend in general though is wanting to include like in a diverse cover crop mix is simply sowing it like 10 or 14 days after you sow the original mix. Otherwise, the buckwheat will just cause problems. It's like that. To sow it, you will need to get the seeds at least lightly covered with the soil somehow. So either sow it onto, toss it onto bare soil and lightly rake it in and then run it over with like a bed roller, or just use a seeder to get it in the soil. Seeders like the Earthway or the Jang bury the seeds as they cover them simultaneously as they plant them. It's very clever. Wait until a couple weeks after your last chance of frost for best growth. All of that to say, buckwheat is an affordable and effective cover crop in the right conditions. In the wrong situation, however, it can become a weed. So, just be smart about it. And follow the seed recommendations from the purveyor in terms of how much per acre. I once got this special type of European buckwheat on accident where the seeds were like super, super tiny and they all loved soccer. If I had sowed that at the same rate that I sow my normal buckwheat, it would have swallowed the entire state of Kentucky. So just follow the seed purveyor recommendations based on they'll know what the type of seed is. Anyway, I think that's it for this Tuesday. Big win yesterday from my Brighton and Hove Albion Seagulls, but you already knew that. Don't forget, we are now officially a 501c3 here at No Till Grower, so donations are tax deductible. They are also greatly appreciated. You can learn more about how to do that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And hey, if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com and say, hey, I'd like to sponsor the show. I love it. I watch all the way to the end when he says this every day. You could keep it shorter than that. It doesn't matter. Anyway, huge shouts to Willie Bean for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No Till Growers. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook of the Seed Farmer at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of May, you get a big shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Swamp Fox. Ooh, that's a good one. Swamp Fox is fun. Renee Butterfly. How do you get the last name Butterfly? That's great. And Ryan. All right, so you'll have to listen to yesterday's story to know exactly what I'm talking about. So when the dust settles from the storm on the ranch hands down there are starting to look around. And what they see around them, as Laurel knew was coming, is no longer the hot Texas ranch that they all worked on. Instead, it's a shady, beautiful, rich savanna. Of course, they hadn't moved. This rationally, scientifically makes no sense. The ranch hands all jumped out of their trucks to get together and figure out what in the world had just happened. Did the storms pick the trucks up and move them? Did they go back in time? They had a lot of questions. And finally, Laurel spoke up. Neither of those things were true, actually, is what Laurel said. That wasn't actually a storm. That, Laurel said, was a gift. A gift of what? The ranch hands asked, but that is for tomorrow on When the Dust Settles, an ecological memoir. Maybe never let me name your novel. Anyway, thanks for watching and/or listening. We will see you tomorrow for Wednesday, appropriately for the Brighton win yesterday.